Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate number 445, Tuesday, May the 29th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so kind of a slow news day yesterday because it's Memorial Day, so you don't get a lot of things happening, but it gave me some time to reflect on where we are right now as we await the upcoming release of the IG report, which is going to deal primarily with the email investigation, how it was conducted, and that will be the first thing that drops. And then I imagine shortly thereafter we'll get the report on the FISA abuse, things dealing with how they went after getting the FISA warrants. Okay, so I've had some time to kind of reflect on this and kind of see where we are. Is we're really just now beginning to unravel this onion. We've been looking at a lot of things for the past year, but we really didn't have enough facts to start really seeing the picture. But we can see it now, but there's still a lot of pieces missing, a lot of things that don't add up. So anyway, what I want to do today, a little bit different than normal, because I don't like to read a lot, but because I've got a lot of information and I got to squeeze it in a short period of time, I'm just going to have to go pretty much through my notes and pretty much read. But I hope you'll enjoy it as I lay out what I think that we're actually looking at here as we await the IG report and begin to move into a whole different phase. And we expect that could be as early as later this week, maybe Thursday or Friday. We'll have to see. We're very close though. So here is my analysis of where we are at this point. SpyGate, as Donald Trump calls it, SpyGate was an inside job. There were no Russians involved in a plot to hack the election. The Russians did not hack the DNC and give the emails to WikiLeaks. The Russians did not attempt to coordinate with any Trump campaign official to provide damaging material on the rotten Reverend Clinton. Nor did the Ruskies have damaging material on Trump that they could use to extort him. The entire narrative is rooted in political bias and personal hatred for President Trump. As I have stated, the idea of the Russians having such material would be highly unlikely. But if they did have such material, it would be the most closely held secret within Putin's inner circle. Mr. Misfit nor Mr. Milian would ever get anywhere near such intelligence. Blackmail material on a sitting U.S. president. Think about that for a moment. In our, 60-plus year now history with the Russians, the prior Soviet Union, which dissolved in, 1987, 1988. Since then, still adversaries of the Russians. Never have the Russians ever had anything like this, if it were true, blackmail material. And if they did, and you really believe they did as an intelligence agency, as the FBI, you would want to find that out. Now, we have Russian spies. We have people who are Russians, but who give us information for money. And the same is true on the flip side. We have assets, intelligence assets in the Russian government, probably in the intel agencies, pretty high up. If we really wanted to know, that is the direction we'd be looking in. That's the people we'd be surveilling. But that's getting ahead of myself here, so let's get back to where I was. The idea of the Russians having this type of material would be highly unlikely. If they did, it's nearly impossible to believe that some low-level players like Mr. Misfit and Mr. Milian would come into an understanding or learning about that being true. It's just there's a massive disconnect here. You don't go from Milian and Misfit to the highest levels of Russian intelligence. If someone did release something like that, they themselves would have had to have been a very high-level inside source, and no one's produced a high-level inside Russian source or any Russian source at all. I'm not talking about 13 trolls and internet campaigns and Facebook. That's not what was being alleged. As I say, the idea is ridiculous, but since that is the game that is upon our table, then I guess we have to play along. So, SpyGate is a massive conspiracy. When I say conspiracy, let me tell you what I'm talking about. A conspiracy, to me, is when you have more than one individuals, can be a group of individuals, in this case probably dozens, if not many dozens, maybe a couple hundred for all we know, inside players, individuals, collaborating in a effort to commit the crime. And in this particular case, in a conspiracy, it's many different people committing many different crimes. At times they may be working in collaboration. At times they may be working independently. But it's an entire umbrella of a giant crime which contains within it smaller crimes, individual crimes, little crimes, setups, frame-ups, and all kinds of things that are happening to serve a larger goal, which is a larger crime. So that's what we're looking at here, is many, many crimes going on within one larger crime, which is, of course, trying to overturn the results of the 2016 election once Trump was elected, and prior to that, trying to destroy his attempt at becoming president. The source of nearly everything that you look at when we now look back, we're a year and a half into this since Trump did that tweet about a year and 4 months, 5 months. And when you look at it, and just from the pieces we have to look at now, it appears as if nearly everything of these individual crimes, these individual frame-up things, these things all appear to lead back to government agencies or private contractors working for government agencies. Nothing really leads back to Russians. Everything leads to the small group, the CIA, Fusion GPS, British intelligence, private spooks, spies, and agent provocateurs. SpyGate was an inside job, and there were no Russians. The truth is now unfolding, and a year from now, the facts will bear this out. It was a political operation and a cover-up and an attempt to overturn an election of a duly elected president. Now, as I work on my timeline, which of course will be up again, I'll be putting the link up every day in the comment section for the timeline. It'll be there every day. So as I work on this timeline, I'm now finding that I'm having to go backwards, back before the fall of 2015, to find or to really connect the dots, or to try to understand what got us here, because we're learning that a lot of things that we thought began in 2016, we find out began actually in 2015. Then Cheryl Atkinson writes her article and takes her timeline back to 2011. I've seen other timelines back to 2013, and I began right around 2014 on my timeline. And Cheryl Atkinson puts in a lot of the political stuff, which was really what was driving a lot of the narrative. There was a lot of political stuff driving the narrative, and it took a buildup of a lot of that stuff, which was mostly garbage, before they actually started launching the FBI operation investigation, and that was largely done, almost completely done, because of the information that was being created and manufactured by the intelligence agencies for the FBI. The intelligence agencies were creating the material along with private contractors, and the insiders within the Clinton group were creating the evidence that they were feeding to the FBI. Whether or not it was a setup and the FBI was ignorant of that, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. So, I'm going to take a look at the roots, not so much on the political side like Cheryl Atkinson did with this woman Chalupa and the Ukrainians, and then feeding it into the Senate Intelligence Committee with John McCain and Kramer and Clinton and all these people, and then we get the political side of it, and then they start doing all these investigations from the DNC, and it works its way through and worms its way through. I want to focus really on even before that, the intelligence things that were going on while Miss Chalupa, and because that was mostly political stuff. They were researching Manafort, getting dirt on Manafort, going back to the DNC and telling them about the dirt they had on Manafort, making its way into the Clinton campaign and the DNC, and then that continued to go on and on and on till they built it up to the point where they actually got to get an actual working group in the Senate, which John McCain, Senator Magoo, was on that committee, and as well as like 9 or 10 people on this little committee they put together to study the Ukrainian issue. And so that's pretty much a lot of political stuff. But I wanted to focus now on the origins, if I can find them. And I don't have enough information now to know everything. But just from what we know now, the origins of the CIA's and the intelligence agencies' involvement and what they were doing, because that would eventually be the stuff that would become what the FBI would use to do their investigation. So we need to look closer at Brennan and Mr. Potato Head and see what he was doing and when he was doing it. So John Brennan has admitted that he was the person responsible for beginning the investigation. He's happy about that. And that began by giving the FBI the intel in the month of August. Of course, the FBI already had begun their Operation Hurricane Crossfire just 2-3 weeks earlier. So I want to focus on Mr. Potato Head and where the CIA actually got involved along with other intelligence agencies, foreign intelligence agencies, and Brennan personally. And nearly everything Brennan did, keep in mind, was before the FBI started or began their involvement. It appears that Brennan was working with British intelligence, and he began creating the fake evidence so that they could give it to the FBI, who could do the investigation and get the FISA warrants and all the rest. So here are some key actions that Brennan took and the dates he took them. In 2015, GCHQ reported suspicious activities to the CIA regarding the Trump campaign. We now know the origin of that. That was Stefan Halper. Stefan Halper is the person who provided the tip to the GCHQ that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, when he was the head of the DIA, what was the name of the group he was head of? Defense Intelligence Agency. He was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General. He was there in London at that Cambridge function, and he spoke to a woman who was a researcher. She was born in Russia, but she is a British citizen and had been a British citizen for a long time. That all was debunked. There was nothing to it. She was just a researcher who actually worked there. She was one of the regulars who was there when you'd go there. And he spoke to lots of people, and she spoke to lots of people. There was never anything at all to that. But that didn't stop Stefan Halper from contacting GCHQ, saying, hey, I think this American general, Flynn, is kind of, he's kind of talking to this Russian woman, and so you might want to notify the CIA. And so it gets back to Mr. Potato Head. But it was a bogus, nothing to it piece of intelligence. Then, in April of 2016, Brennan is shown intel that came from the Baltic states. I assume that that's because of the information sharing that goes on between Ukraine and the Baltic states, probably just a spin-off of what was going on in Ukraine would be my guess. And possibly you will find Miss Chalupa or maybe David Kramer maybe in the mix there. Then April through June, in the months April through June of 2016, there was a steady flow of information from British intelligence to the CIA. Now we know that Christopher Steele was feeding information to the British intelligence. He admitted that. He said he was giving reports to British intelligence about the material he was getting, which was raw, unverified material. And that tells you an important fact. It tells you that Christopher Steele still has direct pipeline to the CIA. But more importantly, we learn from the earlier activities of Mr. Halper that as early as 2015, Mr. Halper also apparently had the ability to pick up the phone and call in a tip to GCHQ, which would find its way back to Mr. Potato Head. May through June of 2016, John Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, creates a 6-agency task force to investigate. May to June 2016, Brennan creates a 6-agency task force. We don't know who those agencies are, or if there's 6 units within the CIA, or if he means 6 completely different agencies. Not real clear on exactly what he means by that, but it doesn't sound good, does it? Then, in the month of August, John Brennan takes 5 actions in the month of August 2016. First, Brennan gets a personal briefing from the head of British intelligence, Robert Hennigan, here in the United States, likely in Langley, Virginia, its CIA headquarters. Pretty rare for the head of British intelligence to come here and personally brief the head of U.S. intelligence. That's a very, very rare thing to happen. And they did it, didn't have a ceremony. It wasn't like they had dinner at the White House. It was done very covertly. We found out about it months later after it happened. Also in August of 2016, Brennan passes intelligence to the FBI, which he claims is the basis for the investigation. He says nothing about Papadopoulos or the dossier. Also in August, Brennan briefs 3 senior advisors and President Obama. August of 2016, he is briefing Obama and 3 senior advisors. August 2016 as well, Brennan briefs the Congressional Gang of 8, and he briefed them independently, each one. Do you think he told Devin Nunes the same thing that he told Peter Schiff? I'm pretty sure he told Peter Schiff about Mr. Halper. That's what I think. But I don't think Mr. Potato Head told Devin Nunes about Mr. Halper. Finally, in August of 2016, Brennan met with Harry Reid, which led Reid to fire off 2 angry letters to James Comey to demand he start an investigation. So, what we said, as I have pointed out earlier, is that we have an inside job. Just like the DNC was an inside job, it was a leak and not a hack. We still have some missing pieces, however, and some things that don't add up, because some people are not telling the truth, and some people are not producing the documents or the witnesses. The dossier is used for 4 FISA warrants, but there's never any mention of Papadopoulos in the dossier, or as far as we know, in any of the FISA surveillance warrants. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that that's because Papadopoulos was part of another element of the overall conspiracy, the overall frame-up. It was one of many, just like the Trump Tower and all the individual things. So this was one operation. And who was probably running Papadopoulos? Well, that was probably being run first by intelligence, British intelligence, and Brennan. And then eventually, once the FBI started their counterintelligence operation, they went to London and probably met with Halper or someone who put him in with Halper. And so Halper likely, who had been doing mostly for the CIA and British intelligence, probably began working as well with Peter's been stroking us in the FBI in their counterintelligence operation. But Papadopoulos was being run on a different game, probably with different players than the people who are running, say, the dossier. That would be Confusion GPS, Bruce and Nellie Orr, Christopher Steele. Here we have completely different players. We have Halper, Downer, Misfit, Papadopoulos. Different players, different things going on. So there were simultaneous multiple operations. The Trump Tower was another one. Trump Tower thing was different people Mr. Goldstone, and all those folks, Vessel in the Sky, Fusion GPS, that was other people. But see, there's a lot of these different crimes that are all part of the much larger crime. These are individual things that are going on. That's why Papadopoulos is not in the dossier, because the dossier was a totally different group of people working that angle. They're working many different angles, committing many different little mini crimes within a large crime umbrella. The FBI said that the Papadopoulos story is the reason that they launched their investigation in July the 30th of 2016. Unfortunately, as we've learned since they've locked themselves into that date, we have received and had unearthed new information that shows that they likely were doing things long before July the 30th, possibly at least weeks, if not maybe a month and a half, 2 months maybe, before, possibly as early as June, maybe even late May, that they were doing things before they officially launched the investigation, which means they better be able to show some probable cause. That's why they don't want to come off the documents, because they show that they were doing things before they officially began their operations, their investigations, which they had no probable cause for. And who was it that authorized the private contractors to access the FBI databases as early as the fall of 2015? What was the legal justification for that? Is Horowitz going to tell us that? It's still a big question. Someone's got to answer who was running that operation. Almost certainly, I think, had to be CIA and the Rotten Reverend Clinton. I mean, Confusion GPS was contracted to write the dossier for her. But they ended up realizing that they couldn't have Hillary Clinton pay for the dossier and then have her walk into the front door of the FBI and say, here is this opposition research I paid for, now go ahead and launch an investigation. She had to, and they had to, launder that information through Christopher Steele. He's the laundryman. He's the launderer. And his office was the laundromat. That is where they laundered the information. And they put his years of experience and his face on that document, on the dossier, to give it credibility so that they could sell it to a FISA court and the media and all of us. That is what Christopher Steele did. He didn't write a word of it. It was cooked up down at Fusion GPS with Hillary and some of her friends. Let's see. We should also keep in mind that all foreign government officials are wiretapped, especially if they are thought to be intelligence agents, which most of them are. So if nearly every foreign agent that's in the United States, and probably quite a few of them that travel abroad and in and out, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds probably of various people whose information we collect and analyze. Foreigners. That's what the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is all about. They get these warrants, they give them to them for 6 months or a year, they just renew them over and over and over again. I promise you, we spy on every Russian ambassador official here, every British, every Israeli. We spy on every foreign official on U.S. soil. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. So they really didn't need to get a wiretap on Page and Manafort. I mean, if you're after the Russians, if what you're saying here in this investigation is, oh, we heard that the Russians have this horrible information on Trump, and it appears that the source of that was this Mr. Misfit and this Mr. Milian, and maybe Mr. Timoviv knows something, maybe Mr. Epstein knows something, then these are the individuals we need to be tapping their phones and surveilling them, which they probably already were if they come to the United States. So, and we could tap the phones regardless. I mean, if the CIA wants to listen in on you, they're going to. They do anyway. The NSA, whoever. But yet they didn't target them. They targeted Page and Manafort. That's because that they were trying to take down Trump, not find Russians. And they didn't have to worry about Russians because there were no Russians. They created the fake narrative. There were no Russians. So, the question is, was there ever surveillance warrants Because, I mean, you want to go to the source. If you're the FBI or the CIA and you say, wow, Mr. Misfit and Milian, these guys seem to have no, they're talking to obviously some high-level intelligence people. They're talking about having this, Russians have this dirt. We need to be listening to Mr. Misfit and Mr. Milian and to their conversations and seeing who they're talking to. We might even, because this is such a major deal, we might want to get with our real high-level, solid sources that we have who give us information, because you know that we have some fairly high-level, inside, solid information sources within the Russian Federation. There's an opposition party there, and they're always happy to help us. Believe me, the Atlanticists share information against Putin's government with the EU and with us and everyone else. We have people, solid, reliable sources, way above the credibility of Mr. Misfit or Mr. Milian. If they really wanted to find out, they would go talk to the real heavy sources they have. But at the last resort, if they thought only somehow Mr. Misfit and Mr. Milian had this information, the wiretaps would be on them. The surveillance would be on them. And we already would have picked them up and had some conversations with both of them. If we were serious about an investigation into Russia trying to steal the election away from Hillary, and if Mr. Misfit and Mr. Milian are the sources, the ones who are saying that this is true, then that's the guys you're targeting. But instead, they target Page and Manafort, and we know why. So, did they, in fact, surveil Mr. Misfit, Mr. Milian, Mr. Tim Aviv, Mr. Epstein, Mr. Deripaska? Are they not the sources for the narrative? No, like I said, because it was all a political operation. It was an inside job, and there were no Russians. Home cooked. That's what we're going to find in about a year from now. I already know it, but that's what the media is eventually going to learn. So now as we look forward to the IG report, we have a pretty good idea. I'm not expecting any major bombshell to people like us who follow this story every day. And there's been quite a few leaks. We have a pretty good idea based on what we learned from McCabe. I think that we're going to learn that Comey, Lynch, and the whole 9 yards, the whole group of them, and especially some DOJ officials who are still around. A lot of the FBI officials have been fired, demoted, or what have you. They're almost all gone, except for Orr and Peter's been Strokers, because apparently they can still be helpful to the other investigations the IG is working on that he's recently inherited. But in the case of the Justice Department, most of those people, a lot of those people are still over there. Yates and Lynch and the head people are gone, but the kind of other tier are still around there, and they're still doing damage, by the way. Still doing damage. And so we are going to see what happens with that IG report, but I do think it is going to be very damning, and I do think that they are going to point out where there should be criminal referrals for probably a half a dozen or so more individuals. I do think that there will be criminal referrals. But as we've seen at this point, there's a criminal referral for McCabe, but he has not been charged or indicted or anything else. So, is that what we're looking at? That Horowitz will recommend or give criminal referrals, but the DOJ just won't prosecute? Because remember, the Horowitz can send the recommendation letter, just like Congress can send the recommendation letter, but who does it go to? Department of Justice. Who's that right now? Well, apparently it's Rodenstein, because Sessions is, he's checked out. Rodenstein. Is Rodenstein going to prosecute all the crimes that Mr. Horowitz is going to point out? The custodian, the cleanup man. Is Rodenstein going to prosecute? Well, so far he hasn't prosecuted McCabe, and we know he lied 4 times under oath, twice to the FBI, twice to the IG, and we know that he was lying about leaking or having other people write stories and leak them to the Wall Street Journal to cover himself in a personal matter regarding him being in charge of the Clinton email investigation. At the same time, his wife was receiving 700 large from a Hillary Clinton bagman named Terry McAuliffe, the former governor. So, I do believe that that's what we're going to see. I believe we're going to see criminal referrals for probably a half dozen to a dozen people over at the DOJ. It'll be a fairly damning report. As far as the surveillance part of it, which will come probably maybe a week, 2, 3 weeks later, he'll drop the report on the FISA abuse. And of course, I think that that's going to be heavily redacted stuff. I don't know how much we'll learn from that more than we know now. We know the dossier was mostly used to get the FISA warrants. Maybe Nunes will get to see something he hasn't seen before, some unredacted documents, to 100% prove that Papadopoulos or any of these other sources, the Cody Shearer memo, or any of these other things, the Cody Shearer dossier, any of these other things, well, will come out. But ultimately, it's like pulling teeth, is what this is like. It's slow. It gets drug out a little bit at a time, and but I guess the biggest thing that could happen from the IG report is if after it comes out, it's really damning, and it gets enough public traction to where people really begin to press and push for that special counsel, someone who has full powers, just like Mueller does, to convene a grand jury, to call witnesses, to subpoena people, to do all those things. I know we're told Mr. Huber is that guy, but he's sitting in an office in Utah with his people in an office in Utah. He's not here in D.C., and he doesn't have quite the resources. We're told he's got the resources of the IG, but the IG is very slow. What we need is a special counsel who can look at everything, just like Mr. Mueller gets to look at everything. So that is the thing I think that could be the best outcome for the IG report, is it be the thing that finally gets them to Sessions or Rodenstein or whoever. Certainly not Rodenstein, because he'll appoint, Hillary Clinton to be the special counsel, or Bill Clinton. Maybe Andrew McCabe. Why not? Yeah, Rodenstein will appoint Andrew McCabe to be the special prosecutor to... How about John O'Brennan? Why not bring in John O'Brennan to be the special counsel to look into the coup d'etat, to look into the Operation Crossfire Hurricane, the intelligence, the foreign spying, and all the collaboration with foreign spies, the confidential informants, and various other things. John O'Brennan, he can be the guy to be the special counsel if Rod Rodenstein, if it's left up to him. Maybe someone like that, maybe a Clinton lawyer, and some more Clinton lawyers can come in along with Mr. Potato Head, and so we could have maybe Mr. Potato Head and Bill Clinton. No, he lost his law license. He can't do it. Let's see. You can bring in the Rotten Reverend, back brace, colostomy bag, the whole 9 yards. Just drag it all in here. The Scooby van, have it waiting outside. Dr. Frankenstein with his injector pen ready to inject at any time. Bringing in the Rotten Reverend. Of course, bring in Chelsea. We might as well bring in Chelsea. And of course, how about Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer? Maybe they would be good on the committee. Maybe Christopher Steele could stop by and have a cup of tea, and he could participate along with, Alice in Wonderland. The entire group, her friends, her rabbits and chickens and such could join, and they could have a good time investigating the deep state coup if it's left up to Rod Rodenstein. No, I don't think so. I think it's something Sessions would have to do, because it's not really the having to do with the 2016 election. It's actually looking into a massive corruption into that department, which he's head of, and we can't have them investigate themselves. It's going to have to be done with very tricky operation, but it's got to be done, and it's got to be done soon. And I hope that that's the best thing that could come out of the IG report, is that it brings about a special counsel. But we'll wait and see. It's coming. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tomorrow, if there's no major breaking news, I'm going to dive into a little deeper into this and look at these main players that we're looking at right now and try to figure out how they all got into the net, basically. and who's working for who and who's doing what. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.